We made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello and welcome to Shipwrecked Comatose, the podcast about Red Dwarf, here on the We Made This podcast network. My name's Mark Adams and I am your host. We are a little bit behind on what we were hoping to get posted by now. You might have noticed, you might not have done. We had planned episodes on the AA and the Smegazines during these last couple of months that we are struggling to find time to schedule. Essentially, as all the five of us have come out of lockdown, we've all had to readjust our life balance a little bit to what we had during lockdown. And I think we're not the only people that have struggled with that. We love this podcast and we are continuing with this podcast. We are just sometimes struggling because we're all working different kinds of hours, different situations with our families. We're struggling to be able to schedule stuff as easily as we once did. Doesn't mean that this podcast is going anywhere. We're still going to do episodes on the AA ads. We're still going to do episodes on the Smegazines. They just might be a little bit later than we'd hoped. Early 2022, we are also going to do Series 6 of Red Dwarf as well. A full rundown of all the 6 episodes in that. In the meantime, we thought you might like a cheeky little repost of something else, which is basically the reason why Shipwrecked Comatose exists. During lockdown, I did a daily podcast. I was actually that bored. Yeah, so I did this daily podcast called Don't Say the C Word, and I got a different guest from different parts of my life to pop on and have a chat for about 20 minutes about something that they like. And Kurt came on and talked about Red Dwarf. We had such a lovely chat that at the end of it, after we'd stopped recording, I said, Kurt, do you want to do a podcast about Red Dwarf? And Kurt goes, I think I do. So we did, and this is kind of what happened. So, yeah, enjoy Past Mark, Past Kurt, and the origin of Shipwrecked Comatose. Hello and welcome to Don't Say the C Word, the daily podcast during difficult times where I talk to a different guest about a different topic every single day. With me at this time is veteran We Made This regular podcaster, Kurt North. Hello, Kurt.
Hello, good morning. How are you?
I'm not too bad considering. How about yourself?
I'm good. I'm getting to do podcasting, come off podcasting and go straight into a Skype call with work. So, you know, it's basically my life now is effectively talking through my Blue Yeti, which is something that I wanted to do for a long time, consistently, but maybe not with work. So it's going interestingly, shall we say.
Yeah, and we are living in interesting times. The fact that my mother is now using Skype and listening to podcasts is something that I never really expected. Hi, Mom.
Yeah. I think that's you're not alone in that. There's quite a few people have started to, use that as a new medium as such to shake off the cobwebs and things like that while they clean the house and whatever. So yeah, it really is an interesting time.
Yeah. Well, I've been around the We Made This podcast network for about 5 minutes, but you've been around pretty much from the start. Do you want to give me a quick rundown of what you've done for the network?
Yeah, well, I started on the Xcast with Tony. Tony's Xcast, the X-Files podcast. That was before the network was even born. I appeared on a couple of Patreon roundtables on there, and eventually took some hosting duties and some guest duties. I've then moved on to showrun a show myself, 2 shows actually. One was Pick Up a Podcast, which is a podcast about podcasters and podcasting. So similar to what you're asking me now, actually. Where I interview people about their podcasts and how they formulate that podcast together, what they do, what disasters they've had, and how they approach their show, things like that. So that's how I tend to look at the Pick Up a Podcast, as a way of getting to know people and also spreading the the net, and for anyone who wants to find a podcast that they may not be listening to at the moment, to do that. So I started with that, and then Tony had been trying to get the Millennium podcast to time. The time is now up off the ground for some time. It just wasn't one. It was a project. It wasn't really getting to the point where it could be aired. So we were trying to record quite a few. And he asked me if I would show run that. So for the past season and a half, we've been doing that. So I've been show running the Time Is Now podcast, which is the TV show Millennium, which was on between 1996 and 1999. And that was a show that was the sister to The X-Files. It was a spin-off show starring Lance Henriksen from Alien fame. So that's what I've been doing. That's due to come back in a couple of weeks, actually, the Millennium podcast. We took a break at Christmas, and we're coming back with that in April. So I've been on other We Made This podcasts as well. I've been on things like Pick a Disc and the like. So so I've been in and around the group and the network for quite some time, I would say.
I'm looking forward to my episode of Pick a Disc coming up. What did you pick for your Pick a Disc?
Mine was U2's Act Chung Baby. It was the pilot episode as well, the very first. But yeah, I'm a big U2 fan. So and Matt isn't. So it was interesting to delve into that and to hope. I think he does actually like the song that we suggested at the beginning. So it's nice to do something a bit different.
Yeah, well, I picked Fat of the Land by The Prodigy, and similarly, Matt hadn't even listened to that album, and I was like, but it's one of the best albums in all of time.
Yeah, it is. I remember watching. When was Fat of the Land out? Was that 1997? Okay, so I would have been in the final year, year 11. I would have been at school, so I'd have been 16, 17 at that point. So that was bang at it at that point. It was throughout the clubs and stuff like that where I shouldn't have been going, but potentially I might have been there.
Yeah, well, I'm a couple of years older than you, so it's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Exactly the same for me. I saw them at Glastonbury 97 and it changed my life.
Oh, right. Okay. That would have been something else.
Anyway, that's not what we're talking about, although I could happily talk about The Prodigy forever. What are we talking about today, Kurt?
We're going to talk about the TV show Red Dwarf. I think specifically because you haven't seen them, the Dave episodes of Red Dwarf, rather than the classics first 6 series and then the 7th and 8th from the BBC. Yeah,
and complete confession time. I think I did see was there a weird one where they played both Craig Charles and Lister, and then Danny John Jules and the Cat, and it was some kind of weird ass crossover that I didn't like.
You might be thinking of the Back to Earth. Yes, Back to Earth.
Yes,
because he was playing his character. He was playing his actor on Coronation Street, Craig Charles. Yeah, so that was the one. That was the first one that came back since the season 8 of Red Dwarf, which was back in the late 90s. And Back to Earth was the first one on Dave.
I didn't get on with that at all, which I think has put me off since. And the first 6 series were sublime. The 7th series I felt was unfairly maligned because the 6th series was so good. The 8th series, in my opinion, not so hot. Would you have similar views of the BBC run?
I would. I actually enjoy season 8 more than most people. I still think that that's a really good season of Red Dwarf. It's probably come down in my estimation with a couple, which we'll talk about shortly, with the Dave ones. But I would agree. Yeah, I mean, season 6 was just top end, and there was a big gap between season 6 and season 7. And season 7 really struggled, and I think because there wasn't a studio audience there, I think things like timing and some of the stuff that we're trying to do, and they're guilty of this in the new run as well, but wasn't quite there, and it didn't really connect with the audience, and didn't really work. And it wasn't the best season 7. There's moments, but season 7 is probably the worst one out of the lot of them for me.
Okay, because maybe it was just my desperate need for new Red Dwarf. I did get on okay with season 7. My issue was the lack of Rimmer, and I didn't like the change of Claire Grogan to Chloe Annett for Kachansky.
Yeah, I mean, I did enjoy aspects of the change, but it just didn't have the same feel. And some of her comic time was in actually some of it was actually really good, and they did go down some interesting avenues in season 8. They found her more in season 8 than they did in season 7 for me, and especially with Crichton. I think they worked out that Crichton and Kachansky in that form worked better, and they paired them up a lot in season 8, which I think was a good thing to do. But you're right with the absence of Chris Barry and Rimmer, because I think, especially with the new ones, which, as I say, we'll get into, the new ones focus quite a lot on Rimmer's backstory. And without him, you don't really have a soul. Lister has his own story, but Rimmer's is more interesting, I think. And I think without him, it does suffer.
So let's go on and talk about the new Dave series. The one that I've seen, which was would you call it Back to Earth, Down to Earth?
Back to Earth.
Didn't have Chloe Annett at all, or Claire Grogan, and really just focused on the main 4 characters. Is that what they did going forward, or have they brought back other characters as well?
Well, no, I mean, Chloe came back at the very end of Back to Earth. It was the thing about Back to Earth was a play on Blade Runner, and everything that was involved in that was kind of quite esoteric, and the way they formulated was really strange, and it's probably all the weaker for it. I actually enjoy it in some aspects, but it's not really Red Dwarf. It's kind of like a different avenue that they went down, even more like a parody, and a much love to Blade Runner, the show, than the film, than anything else really. But when it came to Red Dwarf season 10, because they missed season 9 out because it was quite interesting in itself, and they didn't really consider Back to Earth for season 9 either. So it's kind of all gone a bit weird. But Red Dwarf 10 really went back to basics. It went back to the formula of the 4 of them, of Chris Barry as Rimmer. You've got Crichton, Dave Lister, and the Cat. And season 10 especially focused totally on the characters, and it was very kind of back to old school season 3 onwards Red Dwarf, and I think it was much better for that. Whereas Back to Earth, it was more what's the word? It kind of tried to do something big, and it should have gone small, like it did with Red Dwarf 10.
Yeah, and I think that is widely regarded as when Red Dwarf hit its sweet spot was around series 3.
Yeah,
it's not the series 1 and 2 weren't good, but it's almost like there were 2 different sitcoms, with the cutoff being the end of series 2, is my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you get Crichton coming back because he was played by a different character in season 2, I think it was. That's testing my Red Dwarf history, but
it was.
Yeah.
I can't remember the guy's name, but it definitely was. He was a bit more camp than season 2 Crichton, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, Robert Llewellyn absolutely made Crichton who he is, but yeah, it was a different characterization of him, and they actually write that in season 3's Star Wars credit crawl, where it goes really quickly, and they kind of explain that away, which is fine. But yeah, I mean, as I say, I mean, Red Dwarf 10 it focuses a lot more on the characterization of them, and the first couple of episodes really delve into that, and it's has some great jokes. The actual storylines themselves have they have like a long joke throughout, like a threaded through the episode, but also the interplay between all 4 of them during the course of 30 minutes are actually really good, and some of the jokes are absolutely amazing in and some of the best actually in Red Dwarf 10. In Red Dwarf 11 just changed things a little bit, but yeah, they definitely looked at what they were doing and what they had done in the past. And as I say, I think they were looking for that sparkle of season 3.
And do you know whether it was written by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, or was it taken on by somebody else?
Doug Naylor still writes, and Rob Grant doesn't. I think they've got a script editor who was a fan of the show.
So it does retain some legitimate authenticity, then, you would say?
Oh, absolutely. You'll know this from the previous Red Dwarfs, that continuity isn't Red Dwarf's favourite word, because I think Lister has his appendix out about 4 times. So, but the actual feel and look of the show, they've gone. The set design has completely changed. They've updated it. They're not that concerned about how it looks, and not like a kind of a Star Trek issue where that's not what that's supposed to look like. But right. Red Dwarf is different. It's more about the characters, and I think that you still have the idealistic, bunks that Rimmer and Lister live in. So you've still got that feel. You've still got the look of that. You've still got them having the conversations together. You've also got the Mickey taking out of each other's, and it still has that interplay, and it still does feel very much like Red Dwarf.
I mean, I've never felt like the continuity stuff in Red Dwarf really matters because
No.
quintessentially, I feel like it's as much, if not more, of a sitcom than it is a science fiction.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things. What I think they did really well with both 10 and 11. Though, bear in mind they are separated, and as it happens, I know this is going to not quite air at the same time, but this Thursday coming, there's a new feature-length episode, which is going to be interesting because I don't know whether that's going to fall in the camp of the way that Red Dwarf has been, or they're going to go back to a kind of back to earth look. So we'll see how that works. But the way that Red Dwarf 10 focused on the characters and as you say, the situation comedy kind of thing, that's how it's all built around. Whereas season 11 kind of goes a bit more and kind of focuses more on story. So there's less like just quick jokes and there's more story to it. And I think it works from that point of view because 10's getting back to normal and 11 gives it time just to breathe a bit more. And there's some more brilliant like sort of writing in there as well. And still this through line of these jokes, but it has more concepts in season 11, is more sci-fi based, but season 10 does have its sci-fi elements, but again keeps going back to this whole how they all interplay together. I mean, a perfect example, there's a joke about a moose, and if you get a chance to have a look at it online, just type in Red Dwarf moose. It uses the timing. Danny John Jules, who plays the cat, you can tell he's using the audience as the timing, so he kind of says something and you can tell he's waiting for the audience to calm down. But the actual moose joke, it's played over about 15 minutes, but I think the YouTube videos cut it down to about 8. And that is the perfect epitome of what season 10's about. It's about them interplaying with each other, about typical old school Red Dwarf. Rimmer's trying to pass an exam, and the crew around them know something that he doesn't, and they're making fun of him. And I think it works absolutely perfectly that way, without being that sci-fi trope. It's got that perfect build up to the end of that joke, and it works really well.
You've made it sound like season 10 and 11 are basically carrying on almost as if we've forgotten maybe 8, there wasn't a 9 and a 10, and it's moved back to what people loved for Red Dwarf. Would you say that was fair?
Yeah, definitely. I think the back to earth, if you don't know Blade Runner, you won't really get some of the jokes that they're saying. Red Dwarf 8, I as much as I enjoy Red Dwarf, they kind of brought in the crew of Red Dwarf back, and it was a lot of stories could be told that way and expanded it. But I think looking back at how Red Dwarf works, it needs to be that small ensemble, either on Red Dwarf itself in the quarters or on Starbug, because that's where it works the most. And yes, I would totally agree. If you jump from season 6 to season 10, there's not much of a difference, I would say. It has its moments. It's not as good and as tight and as sharp as it used to be, by all means. There is, acting issues. There is things that kind of jar a little bit. But I would say 70% of the time it actually works really well, and they are really good seasons of Red Dwarf. I'd say if anyone was wanting classic Red Dwarf 10 is more chewable than Red Dwarf 11 is. The Red Dwarf 11 has a bit more to it, but may not be everyone's cup of tea. I'd definitely say Red Dwarf 10 is better.
You seem to genuinely really like both of them.
I do.
Would you consider like 10 and 11, either of them, to be your favourite series? Or if not, what's your favourite and why?
Ooh. I think it's, again, I haven't looked at the seasons, but I'd say that it's got to be three would be probably the best season overall. You mentioned about them finding the stride and hitting what I would say is the epitome. I think 3's got the Gunman of the Apocalypse in it, which was Emmy Award winning.
It's season 6 with Gunman of the Apocalypse.
Yes, sorry, yes. It's been a long time since I watched the classic ones. I've been too busy watching 10 and 11. But yeah, and I think Polymorph must be in season 3, and I would have thought. But yeah,
the first one is, and then they have the second Polymorph one in season 6.
Yeah, so I'm going for season 6 then. I think season 6.
I've just convinced you the same as me then, because season 6 is my favourite. There isn't a bum episode in the whole thing. The first one is where they end up going to the planet of the Gelfs,
Oh
and
yeah.
he has to marry.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Second one is nope, I've drawn a blank. I think the third one is Gunman of the Apocalypse. But no, I haven't got them in front of me. This is just off memory from watching them so much with my brother in
Okay.
the late 90s.
So
But
I've got them. I've got them here now.
go on.
So season 6, number 1 was Sirens, Legion second. Then you've got Gunman of the Apocalypse, Emo Hawk, which is Polymorph 2,
Yeah.
Rimmerworld, which is the one where they made people out of. I think that was Rimmerworld the one. Yeah, he was the one where he made like things like Julius Caesar and that type of thing, Elvis and all those type of things.
Yeah.
And then Out of Time was the cliffhanger, which never got kind of resolved, which is a brilliant thing in Red Dwarf 11, I think it is. The end of season 8 finishes with Rimmer talking to Death and going, "Not now, matey," and kicks him in the balls. And there's this whole scientific like thing falling apart, the universe is falling apart kind of thing, and they reference it in season 11. But what they do so cleverly is they start saying, "Well, what about that time you did such and such?" And someone interrupts them, and then you never find out what happened at the end of season 8, and it's a running joke through the whole episode of like Red Dwarf fans around the world are going, "What happened at the end of episode 8? How did you get out of that?" And they deliberately don't answer that question, which I think is genius.
Excellent. Because weren't they killed by their corrupt future selves?
Yeah, there was, and then Rimmer had to go into the alternate universe where it was all the mirror universe kind of thing, which was backwards, and he to find an antidote for like a virus type thing that they had on the ship. And
Yeah.
when he came back, the virus was backwards because it was in the wrong universe. And then you get Rimmer dying basically and seeing death. So that's yeah, I think that was potentially what happened at the end of 8. Yeah, but it was how this microorganism virus had affected the ship and had killed them all, and how they eventually got out of that, which you never find out, which is fantastic.
Do you know what? I bloody love Red Dwarf. I watched it so much as a kid on VHS, sat there with my brother. I remember it fondly, but having had this conversation, I really bloody love Red Dwarf. I need to
Yeah,
get me on seasons 10 and 11. I definitely think that's a priority for me.
yeah, you'll have to come back to me on Twitter and the like, just to let me know what you thought, because I think if you do like the likes of seasons 3 and 6, I think you will get on with it quite well. What I'll ask you though is, with being such a, how much you love it, one thing that was ahead of its time was the Smeg Ups and Smeg Outs. Did you have them on VHS, and how did you enjoy them?
I very much had those on VHS, yes. Never on anything other, but it was always VHS. There were 3 of them. The first 2 were excellent, and the third one was scraping the barrel, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, there was one where Crichton was kept loading up the computer,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
talking to the screen. It didn't quite work the same, whereas the other 2, I think, were literally just outtakes, which worked really well. And as I say, it was ahead of its time, because now you can't get away from a film or a TV show without having outtakes on them. But I think the way that those 4 work together, their Smeg Ups were particularly funny because they're naturally funny anyway.
Oh, yeah, and it was clear that they were all just mates having a laugh, being
Yeah.
paid to do one of the best jobs in the world, you know?
Yeah, and it's interesting how Chris Barry, my girlfriend, we're watching some Red Dwarf 11 last night, actually, ready for this Thursday. She mentioned how Chris Barry doesn't actually, not on IMDb or anything, he doesn't actually do much work now. So the only time he really comes out of his shell is to do Red Dwarf. And I know that he had issues, later on around the season 6, season 7 mark, where he didn't want to come back to it. There was people potentially saying that him and Craig Charles didn't particularly get along. But that seems to all be back out the window now, because every time they get a chance to come back, they seem to do it with openly and lovingly, which is great.
I think a lot of the time, if you spend that amount of time with someone, you're going to end up not getting on for a bit. The
Yeah,
same happens in music, right? People
yeah,
that were super close end up bickering, give them a few months off, a year or so off, and then they're back together, all matey matey. I think that's probably all that it was, even if it even was anything.
yeah. I mean, swing back round to what we were saying before about U2's Achtung Baby. I mean, that until they found the song One, that was they were pretty much ready to break the band up at that point, and that was back in 92, 93. So they were ready to go at that point. They found the song, and then they found themselves again, which was and the rest is history with that. And And even so, like Gillian Anderson and David Duchovny in my favourite TV show, The X-Files, that there was rumours that they were getting tetchy with each other, and there was arguments behind the scenes. But, when you're doing 24 episodes of television over a course of a year, working 16 to 18-hour shifts, and probably the same with Red Dwarf, it's not the best breeding ground for all happiness and love, is it? They're going to have tetchiness, as Lister would say.
Yeah, and then they'll be writing it on boards and showing it each other and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Kurt, it's been absolutely lovely to have a conversation about something that just reminds me of my youth, I think. So thank you for coming on the podcast.
No, it was my pleasure. I absolutely enjoyed this. It's good to be able to speak about something that I dearly love, and something that I won't potentially touch upon again. So having and even bringing somebody back into the fold, I think, has been worthwhile. So thank you for having me. I'm sure that we'll speak again in other realms on the podcasting network that we're on. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Don't Say the C Word. I'll be back tomorrow with a different guest and a different topic, and I will see you then. Don't Say the C Word is a podcast by me, Mark Adams. My Twitter handle is @MarkAdamsHC. The handle for the show is @Don'tSayTheCPod, and we are part of the We Made This network. That's @WeMadeThisPod. Thank you for listening, and we will see you tomorrow.
Hello everyone, this is Tony, Network Chief of We Made This. As you know, our podcast network brings together a brilliant assortment of talent who talk about all kinds of pop culture content, such as the episode you've just listened to. We're not going anywhere, but we'd love to keep the lights on for even longer if you're able to support our network on Patreon. For just £2 a month, you get your name in lights and the satisfaction of knowing you're helping us produce more great audio. And for £3 a month, you'll get your name in lights, but you'll also get access to an exclusive bi-monthly podcast from the We Made This talent pool on podcasting, pop culture, and, well, you tell us. We'll take your suggestions. For less than the price of a coffee per month, you can help keep We Made This going. Just head to patreon.com/We Made This. That's patreon.com/We Made This. And get the ball rolling.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter @RedDwarfPod, and we are part of the We Made This podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter @WeMadeThisPod.
Elsewhere on We Made This. Chucky Vision.
I've been on some Chucky forums, and there is a lot of hate about Chucky being woke, having a homosexual agenda, how it's ruined the franchise by making it too gay. And I'm like, really? How can you possibly suggest that it's ruined the franchise by being too gay when Seed of Chucky is a thing?
And even if people, I know some people, Seed of Chucky is quite a debatable film, but even Bride is very camp. People should have known the sensibilities of this franchise ages ago.
Free with this month's issue.
The editor, Mark Sutherland, who's a cunt.
A notorious man.
Yeah, he's the man that ran the magazine into the ground. He opens the issue with a really fucking cringy editor's letter.
Oh, yeah, he does.
Which says, for the first 8 months of the year, the alternative nation was depressed. UK garage and pop shite was ruling the charts, and our music was being pushed off the airwaves and common room stereos across the land.
Oh, Jesus.
Now, I looked into the alternative music scene of the first 8 months of 2000. Already released that year, there had been Primal Scream's Exterminator, Blood Flowers by The Cure, Suicide Pact You First by Therapy.
Movie-versaries.
The highest grossing film in the case of Avatar. I don't think anybody ever considers it popular, but everybody saw it, which is really weird. It's this strange case of this film that made so much money, pushed special effects forward so much, and it isn't based on any intellectual property. Not directly anyway, but it has zero cultural footprint. Nobody talks about it.
Yeah, apart from the whole visual thing, right? Like it's impossibly mediocre. It is so middle of the road. like it's not even bad enough to be spoken about.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.